Welcome back to Chess Dog. Today we've got a game between two of my favorite young players, prodigies in fact, both of whom have been covered on this channel. Ryo Chen and Tani Adewumi. They're both 11 years old, both are masters, and they were able to play each other in a tournament game recently at the Texas Fall Open in the Dallas area. Ryo Chen's rating is currently 2380, and Tani Adewumi is currently rated 2246, both at 11 years of age. And it was exciting to see them actually get paired against each other and get to play each other. In the game, Ryo has the white pieces, Tani has the black pieces. Ryo begins with e4, Tani plays c5, knight f3, e6, d4, cd4, knight d4. Ryo plays the open Sicilian. Tani replies with knight c6, knight c3, and queen to c7. So Tani Adewumi chooses to play the Taimanov system in the Sicilian, and this is a very flexible Sicilian. It waits to see what white's going to do with their pieces, and black leaves himself with a lot of flexibility where he can place his pawns, and the pawn structure, the piece placement is very flexible for black. Ryo plays bishop to e2. Tani plays a6, the pure Taimanov system. Castles and b5. Tani is looking to gain space on the queenside. Now, in this position, Ryo takes on c6 with his knight. Now, white makes this capture at this moment for a couple of reasons. He doesn't want black to play bishop to b7 and capture on that square with his bishop. The other concern that he has is he doesn't want black to capture the knight on d4 himself and then hit the queen with the bishop. So he captures with the knight at this time. Also, one advantage for white is that it's very difficult for black to capture this knight with the queen. Not to say it's impossible, it's just hard. And the reason is this move, bishop to f3. And the bishop can become a problem on the long diagonal in the future. So Tani plays the most common and correct move, dc6. In this position, Ryo plays a4. The most common move is f4 to gain space and maybe play e5 and take advantage of some kingside pressure. But Ryo plays a4. And this move is the second most common, but it's the highest scoring move in this position. And what he's trying to do is put pressure on black's queenside pawns to create weaknesses of the pawns and also particular squares. He wants black to play b4, and then he can take advantage of a newly weakened c4 square. And that's exactly what Tani does. He plays b4. Ryo plays knight to b1. The idea is he can take that knight, go to d2, and then hop into the c4 square that's now available since Tani went ahead and played b4. Knight f6, hitting the e-pawn. Knight d2, defends the e-pawn and also prepares the knight to go into c4. Tani plays e5, opening up the diagonal for his bishop at c8. Ryo jumps right in to the c4 square. The e-pawn is too dangerous to take the e-pawn for black, so he plays bishop to e6, challenging the c4 square. Ryo plays queen to d3. The queen is very flexible here. Of course, it defends the knight at c4, adds another defense to it, defends e4, and it can move along the rank as well. Knight to d7. A couple of options that might have been better for Tani. He could have played rook to d8 immediately, challenging the queen on d3, but also the move a5. And this idea of a5 for white and black is sort of a subtext of the next few variations. Both avoid it, but one or the other player should have gone ahead and played their pawn to a5. This would have been a good time for Tani to have done it. He plays knight to d7, aiming to control the c5 square. b3 is Ryo's move. And this next move, which I got with some computer analysis, is the best option for white. What he should play here is queen to g3. And what he's doing here, he's putting pressure on the e5 pawn but he's also putting pressure on the g7 pawn, which makes it hard for black to develop that f8 bishop. If the bishop moves, the pawn can be captured. After a move like h5, attempting to hit the queen on g3, h4, stopping it. Then a5, bishop g5, f6, bishop e3, and white is quite a bit better here. And you don't have to know a whole lot about chess to realize it. You just have to ask yourself one question when analyzing the position that's on the board here, and that is, where is black going to put his king? Where is he going to find king safety? There really is nowhere for his king to be safe, all the while white's king is safely tucked away on the king side. So this would have been quite a bit better for white. Ryo plays b3, Tani plays f6, bishop to h5 check. Ryo wants Tani to play g6 because he wants to soften up that kingside pawn structure to create some weaknesses, particularly at f6. But the stronger move, even still, would probably be to go ahead and play a5. That separates black's queenside pawns and creates that weakness at b3. For one reason or another, the two players were kind of, they didn't see the move. You know, sometimes a move just doesn't fall into your field of vision. That happens to everybody. And that move just didn't fall into Ryo's field of vision. Bishop h5, certainly not a bad move. g6, bishop f3, a5 is finally played. Tani plays a5, preventing white from doing the same. Rook to d1, there's one open file, so Ryo begins to put his heavy pieces on it. Bishop to c5, if Tani plays knight to c5, Ryo would just tuck his queen away at e2 and still be okay. Bishop c5, now, Ryo immediately challenges that bishop on e3. He knows if that bishop is gone, then this d6 square is going to be very vulnerable to his pieces. h5. Tani wants to gain space on the king side with h5. The problem now is the question we asked a little earlier, and that's the question of king safety. Tani's king is quite open, while Ryo's king is quite safe, and that's really the main issue here. And a move like h5 doesn't help the safety of Tani's king in this case. Bishop c5, knight c5, knight to d6, check. Good move. King to e7. Now Ryo plays queen to e3, hitting the knight at c5. And this is a very critical moment in the game. This next move will determine essentially the outcome of the game. What Tani should have done here is play knight to b7. The knight needs to move because it's threatened by white's queen. Going to b7 challenges white's knight on d6. You don't want a knight to just sit there on the 6th rank. A knight on the 6th rank in the center of the board is an incredibly powerful piece and cannot be tolerated for very long. If he goes to knight to b7, he immediately challenges that knight. Then he can contest the d file with his rooks, tuck his king away at f7, maybe g7, and this position is equal. But instead he chose to go to d7, and now white does have a significant advantage. With the strength of that knight at d6, he's going to build up on the d file, take advantage of the lack of safety of black's king, and Ryo Chen has a very good position at this point. Plays the bishop to e2. He routes it to a square where it has access to a much more active diagonal. Rook a to d8, rook to d2. And we can see Ryo beginning to build pressure on the one open file behind that strongly placed knight at d6. Tani plays king f8, bishop c4. Ryo is very happy to trade light squared bishops. That makes it easier for him to penetrate into the position and get at black's king. Bishop c4, knight c4, king to g7. Tani wants to move his rook at h8, but if he did it immediately, white's queen would be able to come into the h6 square. So the king needs to be on g7 to keep white's queen from getting into h6 and causing all sorts of havoc. Rook a to d1. Ryo doubles on the file. Knight to b8. And here Ryo plays h3. The best line would have been rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, queen takes rook, queen to a7 check. And the reason this works is the vulnerability of the a5 pawn. I also would probably be uncomfortable playing this in a game myself because you have to worry about all sorts of potential threats on the back rank. You can get some air for your king, but you know, you have to do a lot of calculating. As it turns out, this works out well for white anyway. If black plays king to h6 after the check on a7, then h4 gives the king some air, queen d1 check, king h2, and black's knight on b8 is undefended, so he moves it to d7. Now it's defended by the queen. The knight grabs the a5 pawn, queen g4, queen to e3 check, king g7, then knight c6. Black can take on h4, but then the king goes to g1. And essentially the a pawn would be unstoppable in this variation. There's really nothing black can do here. Ryo instead plays h3, rook d2, rook d2. And in this case, if black were to go ahead and challenge, you get the exact same variation we just looked at. So black instead plays c5. Ryo plays rook to d5. Now he's attacking c5 twice with the rook and the queen. Tani defends it, but now queen to d3. And the heavy pieces are in total control of the file. His knight is much better placed. So every piece is stronger and his king is safer. And now he's threatening to infiltrate on the file and get at Tani's king. King to f8, rook to d6, threatening the pawn at f6, which is weakened when Ryo earlier played bishop h5 check. Now this is the fruit of that check. That f6 square has been weakened. Knight c6, and then he decides not to bother with the pawn because he can move the rook to d7 with a tempo against black's queen. Queen to b8, queen to d5 with the very clear threat of queen to f7 mate. Knight to d8 covers that threat, then rook to h7. And the threat here is queen to d7 and then rook to h8 mate. So Tani does what he can to prevent that with rook to c7, but then queen to d6 check, and Tani resigned because obviously if the rook moves, he would lose his queen, and if the king moves, he would just Ryo would just take on c7, and the game would be over. Too much material. So this was a very interesting matchup between two massively talented 11-year-olds. I look forward to a lot of games to come against these two talented players, and it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see a game where Tani has the white pieces, to see how that would play out. But I'm looking forward to the games against these two talented players, and I hope you are too. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog, and hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.